What to think about when naming variables. There's a few things to keep in mind when naming variables. First, what does our variable convey to others? Ideally, we would want anyone looking at our data to have an idea of what the variable refers to, even if they know little about the dataset. Second, we should also make sure that any information about the variable necessary for analysis is contained in the variable name. This can speed up the process of data analysis and keeps things simple when looking back on your past work. And finally, how can we condense it as much as possible? Keep it short and sweet, so you're not typing a paragraph anytime you want to search up that variable. I try to aim for 3 to 5 words as often as I can. Next, I'll show you an example of good variable name structure. Keep in mind that this is simply an example, and you can format your variables in whatever way works best for you and your dataset. The first part of the variable should provide the construct you're using, if applicable. This is typically shown in an abbreviated form. If the construct you're working with has a numbering system, you'll want to include that next. This makes it easier to follow scoring guidelines for different measures. After that, you'll want a short summary of the variable. Try to keep this at about 2 to 3 words. Finally, after the period is where you would put the sorting aspect of a variable. For example, in a longitudinal study, this would be the ideal place to put your time point. One last thing to mention is the use of underscores and periods as separators. You can use other symbols as separators in R, such as a hyphen if you'd like. It is, however, important to use a different separator at the end. The reason we use periods at the end of our variable name instead of underscores is to help with pivoting our data between long and wide, giving you the ability to select by whatever comes after the period. To finish off the lecture, I wanted to show you some examples of good and bad variable names. Let's get started with some bad ones. The first variable here is hard to understand because we only have the construct and the variable number, meaning we would have to look up the variable to have an idea of what it's asking. The second variable here goes in the opposite direction, and while it does explain what the variable is asking, it's a little too complicated to type out each time. Here are some good examples of variable names. The first variable shows the construct, Eating Disorder Diagnostic Scale, abbreviated as EDDS. Then we have the standardized number for that question in the EDDS, which is 23. And finally, we have what the question is asking, which is the participant's age. This variable name works well because it succinctly describes the variable we're observing. Anyone with minimal knowledge of the EDDS could understand this name. Our second variable surrounds the participant's wear time of an activity tracker. Next, we have the M, which indicates the variable's a mean. Then there's the 2296, which is simply a cutoff point of the variable we're dealing with. Finally, we have the time point, which is the participant's age in months. This means we could pivot the data wide and select by 128 to compare with other participants at that time point, or we could pivot the data long to compare within the participants. Thanks for watching. I hope this gave you some good ideas for creating your own variable names.